What's up YouTube, this is Tubedigga. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how you can use velocity to automate the sample start point of your samples in the Akai Mpc X, MPC Live and MPC software. Before we get into this video, I've mentioned this many times before. If you didn't already know, I do private one-to-one Skype or Google Hangout lessons. Please email me at tubedigga@gmail.com if you're interested. Also, if you want to contribute to the channel, it doesn't matter what amount, you can choose any amount if you want to show some support and love for me and my channel, and that love will come straight back to you, my darlings. So let's get into the video. So before I show you some examples in this video, I'm going to show you how to set this up for yourselves. You just need to load in a sample of your choice. I've got a few different examples on different sequences in my Akai Mpc X. The first one is by DD Sharp Gamble and the track is called Nobody Can Take Your Place. It's just a 2-bar loop. Ignore the BPM because it doesn't really matter at this point, and I'll show you why later on in the video, that you can actually use loads of different tempos and have quite a large range, and your sample will still play back in a relatively decent manner no matter what the tempo is. So this original track is about 120 beats per minute, but as you can see, I've got my BPM at 60. This is the sample. So it doesn't just work well for just timed up loops or nicely chopped loops. It works on any sample of your choice. I'll also give you an example of that with a wavetable sample later on in the video. So first of all, like I say, you need to load in a sample of your choice. Let's go to Program Editor. As you can see, I've just got this DD Sharp Gamble loop on my first pad here. So the first thing that we need to do is go to the LFO modulation page. In this field here, for the velocity sensitivity, the amplitude is by default set to 127. Okay, so you can play the samples at a particular velocity sensitivity and they will play back at a particular volume. If we take that all the way down to 0, now the pads will behave in the same manner as when you've got full level switched on, and they won't respond to velocity. Switch full level back on, it's exactly the same. So that's what you need to do first, is switch that off. The next step you need to do is go to the filter envelope page, and again in this second field down you'll see the modulation sources. By default, velocity to sample start, it's actually labelled velocity to STA, which is start. That's by default set to 0, but we need to increase that to 127. So we've basically swapped this value here for the amplitude, which is by default at 127. Now we're just increasing the modulation source for the velocity to sample start to 127. So now the pads will play the sample back at different start points depending on the velocity. So as you can see, I've got my full level switched off. So I'm just hitting that at different velocities. And it's actually playing the sample back from different start points. So let's now look at the step sequencer. So as you can see, I've got all 16 steps covered in this 1 bar. So we're at a time division of 16, and I'm using this downward preset velocity shape here. If you press these, this will change. So now I've got 2 lots, but they're split half and half in this first bar. And it gives you all these different shapes. You can choose all these ones here, and it gives you a variety of different preset choices. I've also got this triangle one at the bottom. Okay, so let's just go back to this downwards sawtooth ramp and I'll press playback. This is just one loop, and this should play back as if I just got one step put in, and the sample is going to play back in its entirety. Now let's see what happens when we increase the BPM. Okay, so let's try some different shapes out. Of course, you can all do this live, and that's what makes this a really excellent feature of the MPC X and MPC Live and MPC software. So now it's split the sample into 2 essentially playing all the sample start points in reverse order. And again in reverse, but split into 2, and again split into 4. And back to our original. Of course, you're not stuck with just a preset. You can just do things completely random, and this will play back all the start points in a completely random fashion. Take a look at some of the other shapes. So what's happening here is it's playing these first 4 steps at the very end of the sample because it's at its lowest velocity, and these 4 steps are playing at its highest, and again for the second half of the bar. If we press it again, now we've got the very end, the very start, the very end, the very start, and now this will play the start of the sample and the very end. We've also got this big triangle shape here, so this will play from the end, not at the complete end, because as you can see the lowest value it's not at its most lowest, it's just above that. So it goes up all the way to the start and then returns towards the end. But basically it's this shape here, the downward sawtooth preset, which will play the sample back as it should be heard. And as I showed you with the tempo, it's almost like the perfect way to time stretch things without actually adding those funny artifacts you get with the warp function. So that's just one example. So let's now go to our second sequence, and I've got an amen break loaded onto our first track. This is the loop. Let's go to the step sequencer. Now in the program editor I've got it set up exactly the same way as that DD sharp gamble loop, and let's now take a listen to that amen break. And now let's change those shapes on the fly again. It gets a bit messy when you do random, but obviously if you keep going and give some shapes, and you can start to adjust these to how you want them and get things sounding random but a bit better and a bit less messy. At the moment this is quite messy. We can do the same with this amen break. We can adjust the BPM. Now let's take a look at our fourth sequence. This has got a speech sample loaded in.
Something dark.
It cuts off a little bit there. Let's increase the decay time or the sustain.
Something dark. Something dark. Something dark. Something dark. Things dark.
Now it's playing in reverse. Let's go to our fifth sequence, and now we've got a wave table. So wave tables, if you don't already know, are samples that have been designed in such a way that when you scan through them, you get some really interesting granular and textural results. So this is a sample on its own. So there's a lot of harmonic content in there. Let's go to the step sequencer. So in this example, I've got 2 bars. So on the first bar, I've got this triangle shape for the velocity. Let's go to the second bar, and then I've got a sawtooth ramp. So let's play that back. And of course, with something like this, you could probably go a bit more crazy with the actual randomness, because the sound in itself is obviously not a rhythmic sample. And again, the great thing about this is you can do this all live. So say if you had a beat running behind this, that was just playing straight, you could be doing all this clever stuff over the top and make your sequences sound nice and interesting and evolving. So that's all the examples. I've shown you how to set it up. Now the last thing that I want to touch on is how this can also be controlled with the 16 levels. So if we press 16 level, as you can see, one of our options is velocity. So we can just do exactly the same thing and trigger this sample from different start points on the pads. So it's essentially behaving just like a chop program, but we've not chopped it up at all. The sample is fully intact. We're just using the velocity to trigger it at different sample start points. Let's go up to that wavetable. We can do the same for all of these. The aim and break. And as you can hear, the pads are kind of playing it back in reverse again, because the very top pad is the highest velocity when you're using 16 levels. So this is the first kick drum of the aiming up here. Now, you can also use the note repeat, but things will get a little bit glitchy unless your tempo is set to match the actual loop you're playing back. Because we're at 30 beats per minute, we really ideally need to go back to 60 beats per minute, and it was playing back fine there. So you can use your note repeat alongside the 16 levels for even more live playback fun. Now I forgot to mention this, so let's just take a listen to the aim and break again. Let's bring the attack to 0. You can really hear it at the end with that crash cymbal. It's got a click in it, and that's because it's chopping a sample that isn't exactly timed to the tempo that you're playing at. So you can actually get rid of that by adjusting the tempo, but there's no point. You might as well just increase the attack to at least 10, and that will make it a lot smoother. It doesn't really affect the transients too much, so you don't have to worry about that. And then your playback's a lot smoother. So I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Please stay tuned for the next one. This is Tubedigga, and I'm out.